Tony Gilroy has confirmed the Ghorman Massacre is officially coming to Andor Season 2. What was originally a very deep-cut event in Star Wars history is about to become well-known across the fandom. So let's talk about what we know about it, what we can expect to see in the series, and why it could recontextualize so much of what we know about the Rebel Alliance. The Ghorman Massacre has always been something that was talked about but never directly depicted in a story. It originated in Star Wars Legends role-playing materials from the mid-90s. A group of peaceful protesters fought against Imperial taxation in their sector by blocking Wilhuff Tarkin's ship from landing, so Tarkin simply landed on them, killing hundreds if not thousands. This happened only a year after the rise of the Empire and helped build Tarkin's ruthless reputation. He was not punished for the massacre and was promoted shortly after. The senseless loss of life helped encourage Imperial senators like Mon Mothma and Bail Organa to begin secretly working against the Empire, eventually forming the Rebel Alliance. So that's what we know from non-canon sources, but what do we know about the current Star Wars timeline? For starters, the Ghorman Massacre takes place 16 years later in the timeline, about 2 years before the events of Rogue One and A New Hope. According to the Star Wars Timeline's reference book, Imperial troops slaughter peaceful protesters on the planet, and no mention of Tarkin is made. The event still encourages the creation of the Rebel Alliance. Up until this point, several rebel cells worked against the Empire individually, but the Ghorman Massacre prompts Mon Mothma to publicly denounce Emperor Palpatine, holding him responsible for the deaths of the protesters. This makes her an enemy of the state and forces her to flee Coruscant and go into hiding. Thanks to Gold Squadron and the crew of the Ghost, she is rescued from Imperial agents and reaches Dantooine, where she sends out a message of unity for all rebel cells. A small fleet meets her in orbit, and so the Rebel Alliance officially begins. I expect that information will form the basis of what we see in Andor Season 2, and Tony Gilroy recently had plenty to say about the Ghorman Massacre. In an interview with Collider, he said it will be a significant part of the show that carries over 5 different episodes. He says there's a lot of confusion within canon about what actually happened there, but says he's confident that the really deep, passionate Star Wars community will appreciate how they've straightened out that story. I don't know that I would say there's confusion surrounding the massacre as much as I would say it's simply been left undefined. But for an event that holds such a profound impact on the founder of the Rebel Alliance, I am already glad to have it defined in the series. Since the series is broken into 4 3-episode arcs and each arc takes place in a different year, I don't think we're going to see the massacre itself lasting 5 full episodes. I'm expecting there will be 2 episodes in 1 or 2 earlier arcs that fill us in on how the protests are building. The seeds were already planted in Season 1, with Mothma telling Perrin that the shipping lanes to Ghorman were cut off and that it would lead to starvation. She also attempts to introduce a bill to help the Ghormans before she is interrupted by the news of the Aldhani heist. I think we can expect similar build-up in Season 2, perhaps showing the Empire's growing presence on the planet in response to the protests. I think that would catch the eye of Luthan Rail. My current theory is that we will learn that the Ghorman Massacre is similar to the Aldhani heist in the sense that it will be partially manufactured by Luthan. He robbed the Empire in Season 1 for credits, absolutely, but he also wanted the Emperor to overreact. He wanted people to suffer at the Empire's hands so they would wake up and fight back. The Ghorman Massacre could be the next evolution of that. If the eyes of the galaxy are on the Ghorman protesters, Luthan could see that as a powder keg that simply needs a match. We've seen Cassian blending in on the planet and assembling a sniper rifle in his hotel room. Maybe he's been sent to assassinate a high-ranking Imperial there, or maybe he's simply told to open fire on a stormtrooper, once again sparking an overreaction, a public display of violence at the hands of the Empire for the whole galaxy to see. It could galvanize galactic citizens and senators to more actively fight back, but this time it will be at the cost of innocent protesters. I wonder if that could push Mothma to take that leadership role as well. Luthan's playbook is decidedly not what we're used to seeing from the Rebel Alliance. I wonder if there could be a bit of a power struggle between the two of them. I've loved how this series has wrestled with Mothma as an idealistic leader, while Luthan is more realistic. Star Wars talks a lot about how to fight without losing your soul, and Luthan is a character who has straight up admitted to burning his. I think Mon is propped up as an example of what we should hope for in our leaders, but Luthan is unfortunately the kind of person a rebellion winds up needing to shock people into action. He and Saw Gerrera are firmly in fighting what you hate territory, while Mothma is about saving what you love. Maybe the Ghorman Massacre will be the event that shocks her into a moment of clarity, realizing that if she doesn't step up to lead the rebellion, then they might all burn their souls along with Luthan. There definitely seems to be some conflict coming for the two characters. Speaking with Entertainment Weekly, Gilroy said, "I think of Luthan as a startup CEO, some guy who built a business in his garage. For 15 years, he built the revolution in his garage, he and Clea. Then in Aldhani in Season 1, they went public, and now they're out there. Now for the next 4 years, how do you scale your company up? It's multinational. How do you scale your little business that was so successful in your garage and build it out? And if your business is based on secrecy and paranoia, how hard is that to do? And how well are you going to play with others? And how welcoming are you going to be to new ideas?" Those are all going to be the friction for him in this second half. He has one speed, and that is to make this all happen. He would do anything for the revolution, anything. I think seeing more friction between rebel leaders sounds incredibly interesting, especially after reading about exactly that in the recent book The Mask of Fear. We're so used to seeing rebels like Mothma and Bail Organa being shining examples of leadership and cooperation, but in that book, they do not get along. I would love to see Mothma's relationships with Bail and Luthan evolve up until that point where she takes the public leadership role. It does sound like we'll be seeing her big exit from the Senate as well. I don't think we're going to get all the way up to Dantooine and everything we got to see in Star Wars Rebels, but in 2 separate interviews, Tony Gilroy mentioned Mothma leaving the Senate as a big moment on his calendar of galactic history. He knew he had a 5-year period of the Star Wars timeline, and he marked down all the big events he wanted to define. I think he wants to define Mothma's exit from the Senate, and I really hope we get to see her full speech denouncing Palpatine. Andor has become known for its amazing monologues, and I'd love Genevieve O'Reilly to get a chance to deliver a speech as iconic as those given by Stellan Skarsgård, Andy Serkis, and Fiona Shaw. Once again, speaking with Entertainment Weekly, Gilroy said, "I don't think anybody has a harder road than Mothma does, because she has to do everything that everybody else does with all the tension, fear, and anxiety, and she has to do it in public. She has nowhere to hide, and this season just ramps that up to an almost unbearable point. What Genevieve is going to do in this second season, we realized in the first season what a brilliant actress she was, and that we hadn't found the limits of what she could do. We still haven't found them. But the opportunity to write for her and write her story large was very important to me in the second season." O'Reilly's scene with Tay Kolma, where she keeps reminding him to smile, like Tony says, being a rebel in public, that's one of my favorite scenes of Season 1. I'm so happy it sounds like we'll be getting more of that and far more of the character in Season 2. I think it would be awesome if Cassian were involved in rescuing her off of Coruscant, but I'm not sure how that'll work with different arcs taking place in separate years. I will say I think there's potential for some of the timeline to get moved around a bit. Mothma establishes the Rebel Alliance above Dantooine 2 years before the Battle of Yavin in Star Wars Rebels. I think that will stay consistent. But it's possible they could move the Ghorman Massacre to the year 3 BBY or something, so we could get 3 episodes about the massacre, do a time jump, and then get 3 episodes about Mothma fleeing the Senate and Coruscant. Timeline questions aside, I think the Ghorman Massacre will be a great chance to tie directly into Cassian's story as well. In Rogue One, he tells Jyn he needs to go to Scarif to make up for all the terrible things he's done in the name of the rebellion, working as an assassin and saboteur. We also see the moment that it all becomes too much for him. He can't bring himself to assassinate Galen Erso. I think we could mirror that exact moment in Andor Season 2. If Cassian is there to assassinate an official or simply open fire on a random stormtrooper, we could get those same shots of him looking down the barrel, lining up the shot. Maybe he has a moment of doubt, but then he pulls the trigger and chaos erupts. Ghormans are killed, and it will be partially his fault. Luthan might be able to rationalize the loss of life if it brings more leaders and fighters to the rebellion, but I can't imagine that would sit well with Cassian, especially if he has to live through it all while Luthan is safe and desensitized in his shop. Actually showing us some of the terrible things Cassian did will make his choice and sacrifice in Rogue One even more significant. Something I love about Andor is that it explores the themes of Star Wars in a more complex way. So far, I think everything it has to say is in line with George Lucas's messaging and the kinds of morals you would find in the Clone Wars, for example, but it digs deeper into our real lives. The villains on screen aren't cackling sorcerers in black robes with lightning shooting out of their fingertips. They're overly zealous corporate security guards searching for belonging. The heroes aren't dressed in white and gold with lightsabers shining against the dark. They're people struggling to find what's right when all those very obvious heroes have been killed off. And then you have people like Luthan, who are definitely against the Empire, but can you classify him as a hero when he treats his people like pieces on a Dedrick board? I loved talking about the moral complexity of Andor Season 1, and I think Season 2 having a strong focus on something like the Ghorman Massacre is a great sign. I have a feeling we'll have a lot to talk about for those 5 episodes and beyond. Hopefully this video has you primed and ready to understand the significance and weight of that event. If you haven't already, please like this video, subscribe to the channel to keep up with all our upcoming Andor content, follow us on our socials, and consider checking out our Patreon page, where we'll release our video reactions and watch-alongs for every episode as they release. As always, thanks for watching, and may the Force be with you.